And this is why I say that capitalism is one of the most important topics that all societies should be talking about. It's vital to get it right. So in the rest of my talk, I'm going to ask 3 questions about capitalism. I'm going to offer partial answers to the first 2, and then my hope is that what I say will help you guys think about question 3. So here we go. Why is it so hard to think about capitalism? So I want to tell you the most interesting idea that I've encountered in the last couple of years. It's the difference between tame problems and wicked problems. This is a distinction that comes to us from 2 professors at Berkeley, at the University of California, Riddle and Weber. And they wrote an essay about how the problems in the 19th century were really tame problems. They don't mean small. They mean problems like cholera. A tame problem is one where everybody knows what the problem is. They agree on the kinds of tools that might solve it. And then they can see when the problem is solved. So cholera killed tens of millions of people. It's caused by a bacterium in the water. And in the 19th century, when they figured out how to create plumbing and to bring water into cities and how to have toilets that bring the human waste products away, problem solved. It was a big problem, but it was a tame problem. It just sat there and let people solve it. Wicked problems are very different. Wicked problems activate the experts' moral and political values, so that when they define the problem, they're already imposing their pre-existing ideas. This is why it's so hard to solve poverty, because we bring in our favorite theories to explain what causes it and how to address it. When I moved to a business school 3 years ago, just as Occupy Wall Street was breaking out, I heard all this very negative talk about business from Occupy Wall Street and from the newspaper and from my friends. But I was in the business school, and I heard all this very positive talk about business, how it generates value, it can be socially responsible, it can solve all kinds of problems. And I began to realize our discussions about capitalism and economic policy come out of 2 entirely different worlds that don't make contact with each other. And I thought, here's a place where moral psychology can really help us think about economic problems. So what I did was I wrote down the stories as I was hearing them. And when I say I wrote down the stories, I don't mean these are stories that anybody told me. Nobody can really even give the entire story. These are narratives or stories that we hear bits of as we're growing up, and we assemble them unconsciously. We may not be able to say the full story, but when we hear a fact, we read a newspaper article, if it fits with the story that we've got in our heart, it feels good. It affirms our story. But if it contradicts it, we don't like it. We don't want to hear that. So I was telling these stories using PowerPoint slides for a few months, and then I decided it's more effective to show them in video. So I hired a video company to turn these images into 2 90-second videos that tell the stories about capitalism. So I'll show them to you now. I hope you find them helpful. Just think, for each story, does it resonate? Does it feel right or true or correct to you? Here's the first one.
Once upon a time, work was real and authentic. Farmers raised crops, and craftsmen made goods with their own hands. But then, capitalism was invented, and darkness spread across the land as the smokestacks of the Industrial Revolution covered everything in soot. The capitalists became ever more skilled at extracting productivity from workers and pocketing the gains from their labor. The workers eventually fought back by unionizing. In the early 20th century, as the brutality and stupidity of capitalism were exposed, many governments granted workers some protection from the predators. Democratic welfare states were born. But the capitalists and their right-wing cronies were unrelenting. And in many countries, they have destroyed the unions, slashed regulations, and given the corporations free rein to exploit at will. So, the rich get richer, the rest of us get poorer, our democracy gets weaker, and the planet gets hotter. It is now the duty of every decent person to join the fight against global capitalism and the super predators it has unleashed upon us.
Okay, so does that feel true? Does it resonate with you? Or does it disturb you and offend you? Here's the second story. And you'll note as you watch it that it has the exact same structure as the first story. I wrote out the sort of the high-level structure for both stories and then just put elements into the same frame for both stories.
Once upon a time, almost everyone was a peasant, a serf, or a slave. Kings and feudal lords took most of what people produced, so nobody had much reason to work hard. But then, in the 17th century, capitalism was invented and the liberation began. In England, Holland, and America, they discovered that when you give people property rights, the rule of law, and free markets, you turn on a switch in their hearts. People want to work when they can keep the fruits of their labor. They want to invent new products, provide for their children, and be useful to others. Free market capitalism enables them to do these things. In the 20th century, some countries embraced communism and centralized planning, always with the same result: shortages of everything, including food and freedom. But countries that embraced capitalism have grown prosperous in a single generation. Yet, despite the evidence of history, the left-wing egalitarians are unrelenting, and whenever they get control of a government, their first target is economic freedom. The egalitarians don't want to live in a world in which people who create more value for others get to enjoy more wealth for themselves. They'd rather that everyone be equal and equally poor. It is now the duty of every decent person to join the fight to protect capitalism and to extend its blessings to all of humankind.
Okay, I could do the same voting thing, but I know the results. People on the left, of course, resonate more with the first story. People on the right resonate more with the second story. Now, of course, these are cartoons. These are gross exaggerations. But if your heart is on the side of the first story, you're going to interpret everything differently. You're going to interpret the facts differently than if your heart is with the liberation story. And that makes it so difficult for us to make good policies in our democracies. Here's the basic psychological principle. What we believe drives what we perceive. Let me show you a simple demonstration of that. Here's an image. What do you see? What's the first thing you see? How many of you first see 3 partially eaten pizzas sitting on a table? Was that the first thing you saw? Or did you see a triangle on 3 circles? Okay, lots of heads nodding. The reason this is so compelling is because many people can see the faint edges of the triangle in the white spaces. Look closely. Can you see, raise your hand if you can see a little, just very faintly, the edge of the triangle. Raise your hand. Can you see that? Okay, so most of you can see that. Watch. I'm going to make those edges disappear just by covering 2 of the circles. Because the edge is not there. There is no edge there. What's happening is that your brain is making a guess about what's there, and on our planet, the most likely thing that would cause that perception is a triangle on 3 circles. So your brain then makes that guess, and it tries to see maybe some faint difference between the black and white dots on the retina, and it succeeds. It's able to see it, even though it's not there. So that's a simple illustration of this principle using visual perception. Here's another example. Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, very much on the left, writes for the New York Times. He's been so frustrated that many governments responded to the financial crisis with austerity by cutting spending. When Keynesian economics, or basic economics, says you should raise spending. And he asks, why? What's wrong with these leaders and these economists? And he guesses, he offers this idea that some people have a visceral or an intuitive sense that suffering is good, that we must pay a price for past sins. Some of these people see the crisis as an opportunity to dismantle the social safety net. So he's proposing that economists are following their moral convictions and it's warping or changing their economic prescriptions. That's just what I'm saying is happening. Well, I realized I actually have the data in my database to test his claim. So I went and looked in the Your Morals database. We've had 300,000 people take our surveys so far. And I found 3 questions that illustrate his claim. So the first one, on one of our surveys, we ask, the world would be a better place if we let unsuccessful people fail and suffer the consequences. So when people come to the site, they register as being on the left or the middle or the right. And what we see is that people on the left, over there on the left, really disagree with that statement. They give a very low rating. No, I reject that. That is not true. But as people get more conservative, it becomes true. Conservatives agree with that statement. That's just what Krugman was claiming. Another one. Life would have very little meaning if we never had to suffer. Suffering teaches us. People on the left are unsure. They're neither pro nor con. But as people get more conservative, they agree. A reversed statement. It is usually better to show mercy than to take revenge. People on the left really agree. People on the right agree, but not as much. So think about how government ministers or economists in Europe in particular might have reacted when Greece, the country of Greece, borrowed all this money and wasted it with corruption. And then they say, oh, we don't have the money. What should we do? Well, if you're on the left, you'd say, oh, well, it's better to show mercy, and we shouldn't just let unsuccessful people fail, and, the poor people are suffering. We need to bail out Greece. We need to help them recover. But if you're an economist or a prime minister on the right, you say, no. Let them suffer. Let them learn a lesson. The world's a better place if people learn the lesson that irresponsible behavior brings disaster. So again, economic policy, even at the macro level, can be driven by morality. And so this concept of wicked problems is such a powerful idea for understanding how any society deals with its problems. Just in the week I've been here are some problems I've heard Koreans talk about. The power of the Kaibols, inequality, political reform, labor rights, financial regulation, and of course North Korea policy. Koreans are divided in many ways, and I'm sure there are 50 other issues. Never before have people been raised in a radically different world from their parents. That's what capitalism does to us. It transforms our minds and our values. East Asian countries are less happy than they should be, given their prosperity. So South Korea is number 41. There is a lot of exploitation in real, live capitalist systems. But at the same time, there's an enormous amount of liberation, and it raises almost everybody up.